Now, let's get to the important matter of knowing how to develop an idea into a proposal that gets funding. Whether you are a business approaching private investors or a nonprofit approaching a funding source in your own country or elsewhere, whether you are asking for money from a foundation, corporation, government agency, or individual, the same principles apply. Knowing how to create a successful proposal and acquire funding is a skill that everyone needs. Knowing what makes a good proposal, if you are in a position to give funds, is equally important. It may be today, it may be tomorrow. Guaranteed, at some point in your professional life, directly or indirectly, you will be involved in the funding of a project. Everyone needs to know what makes a successful proposal and what makes an unsuccessful one. People who succeed at funding know that fundraising is not simply about asking for money. That would be too easy. If raising money were just about asking for money, it would consist of three alternatives. Someone would just ask and wait for one of three answers: yes, no, or maybe. No, obviously, fundraising is not simply about asking for money. People who are successful at getting funding also know that the key to unlocking all the funds they need is knowing that money follows great ideas. In other words, they know how to create a marketable idea. Fundraising is about selling ideas. The people most successful at getting funding know that if they have a really marketable idea, they will be able to find funding. People always have money for what they want to have money for. So, what's a marketable idea, you're probably asking? I'm going to say one word. It may seem to be totally unrelated to a discussion about fundraising, but it is the key to the major point I am making. The word is tsunami. The tsunami that struck Southeast Asia at the end of 2004 made headlines around the world. But what do you picture when I say tsunami? Devastation, loss of life, scenes of horror, chaos, all those terrible images, I'm sure. But what else do you picture? People rushing to help? The world mobilizing assistance to affected areas? Government and private groups airlifting donations to victims? Exactly. There was an enormous, obvious, sudden need. No one had to write a proposal asking people to help the victims of the tsunami. Everyone could see the compelling need. It was right in front of their eyes. And people immediately responded generously to the urgent need for resources. Sadly, we have the equivalent of tsunamis every day of every year, everywhere around the world. Millions of children go hungry. Millions of men and women are illiterate. Untold numbers of men, women, and children die because they drink polluted water. Countless children die because they have never received vaccinations that would cost just pennies. The list goes on and on. And yet, as devastating as these and similar circumstances are, there is rarely a sense of urgency about those situations. Certainly, nothing equal to the outpouring of money and assistance for victims of the 2004 tsunami. As I said before, successful fundraising is not about asking for money. It's about making an idea marketable so potential donors want to fund it. You have to make it real for people, as real and as compelling as the horrible aftermath of a tsunami. How can you tell if an idea is really powerful enough to get funding? A strong marketable idea scores high on 5 criteria. First, a strong marketable idea has context. That is, it relates to a major negative trend that gives it the kind of urgency we saw in the Southeast Asia tsunami. Think of the difference between a proposal that simply says that it wants to improve living conditions in developing countries and one that really identifies a specific, compelling issue. For example, water scarcity. It's the opposite of the tsunami problem of too much water too soon in too limited an area. Yet over time, water scarcity will harm and kill more people in more countries around the world than even the most devastating tsunami. But too few people pay attention to it. Here's the kind of negative trend to which a proposal needs to relate to get the attention of funders. For example, water scarcity threatens the lives of people and could lead to increased global tensions. In 1998, the New York Times published a dramatic article entitled "Water: Pushing the Limits of an Irreplaceable Resource." It outlines the pressure on global water supplies. The facts are sobering. To begin with, an infinitesimally small quantity of water supports life on Earth, less than 1% of the water on the planet. A full 97.5% of our water is salt water in our oceans and seas. Most of the remaining 2.5% is locked up in glaciers and ice caps. And yet, growth in population, industrialization, and urbanization have increased our dependency on water worldwide. Human use of water grew almost 8-fold in the 20th century. The New York Times article estimates that 1.3 billion people in developing countries do not have access to safe water, and that almost 4 billion people have no access to sanitation or sewage services. It quotes World Health Organization figures that almost half of the people of the world suffer from waterborne or water-related diseases. It says that World Resources Institute has estimated that by 2050, 13% to 50% of the world's people will be living in water-scarce countries, mostly in the Middle East and Africa, but that all countries face pockets of scarcity due to drought and limited supply for a variety of reasons. The World Bank estimates that by 2025, because of population growth, a number of countries will be too dry to maintain recent rates of water use. Others will need to increase supply or reduce consumption. The United Nations further has identified 70 areas around the world in which armed conflict may break out because of contested water supplies. In addition to relating to a major negative trend, the second characteristic of a really marketable funding proposal is that it requests money for a clear unique solution to reverse the negative trend. That negative trend need not be a social trend. It can also be a trend that relates to and that can be solved by business interests. It is important to remember that both the solution and the identification of a problem relates to and can be, in fact, in the spheres of organizations that are large, small, for-profit, or not for-profit. The key issue is to have identified a trend that needs to be solved and that good thinking, thoughtful solutions can be applied to. Think of the difference between a proposal that says, in some general way, a certain organization, to go back to our example of water, wants to increase the supply of usable water, and a proposal that shows how simple techniques taught to average people could turn polluted water into drinkable water. The third characteristic of a strong marketable proposal is that it seems doable. It isn't just pie in the sky. It makes financial sense. Compare your reaction to two different solutions to water shortages in the Middle East. The first, floating a polar ice cap to the region. The second, developing a sophisticated system that uses minimal amounts of water to producing maximum results in growing crops. The ice cap idea has been suggested but never got anywhere for obvious reasons. But the second idea, called drip irrigation, was developed in Israel. It has transformed Israel's desert into farming land. The technology has been exported around the world. And noticed there, too, that that kind of problem and that kind of solution crosses over the structure of an organization. It doesn't matter whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, whether it's a business or a governmental agency. Technologies can be developed, exported around the world. They can solve problems. Investors, funders are looking for precisely that kind of mix. The fourth characteristic of a strong marketable funding proposal is that it has to inspire people. It offers more than just a solution to a problem. It makes everyone feel good about doing something good. It proposes to achieve a broad objective that improves the lives of people. The fifth characteristic of a strong marketable proposal is that it produces measurable results. Funders look upon the money they give as investments, not just as acts of charity. Successful proposals have built-in measures of effectiveness. They aim to show funders that there is a return on their investment. Of course, funders won't get money back as they would if they were investing in a for-profit business, but they are very keen to get it back if they are investing in a for-profit business. But everyone should be able to see results, honest results, positive or negative. Even negative results are important. They may reveal areas that justify additional funding that could not have been anticipated at the time of the initial request. Organizations that want to continue to receive funds must understand that they must monitor results over time. So remember the 5 characteristics of a strong marketable proposal for funding. First, it relates to a major negative trend. Second, it requests money for a solution to reverse a negative trend. Third, it seems doable. Fourth, it inspires people. And fifth, it produces measurable results. Now, listen for those characteristics in two grants funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In 2004, it gave $4 billion to numerous health projects around the world. For example, it gave $45 million over 7 years to Johns Hopkins universities in the United States to develop and validate novel community-level intervention strategies to reduce rates of tuberculosis in populations with epidemic rates of HIV infection and escalating tuberculosis incidence. For another example, it gave Public Radio International $842,000 over 3 years to increase public awareness and understanding of global health issues and their interconnections with economic and social development around the world. The same characteristics are needed for a proposal that a for-profit company would make to outside investors to fund a marketable product or service. If you are in a position to fund proposals, you are used to comparing and rating projects. But if you are seeking funding now, or think you might be in the future, you are probably asking yourself, I know the 5 characteristics of a strong, marketable proposal for funding, but how to identify the right negative trend to try to reverse it? The answer is to create and align 3 circles of 10 people. Group 1 is made up of people within any organization. Group 2 consists of people served by any organization. And Group 3 is made up of people outside any organization, but related to it. Select people in each circle of 10 who have connections to 10 other people, who can give them equally informed opinions they can pass on to you. Pose the same question to each group. What major negative trend can we help reverse? And ask them to pose the same question to the 10 people they know. If they all come up with the same idea, you know from the start you have a strong, marketable idea. If they don't, test the priorities of each group out on the others. Eventually, get all circles to agree to the same list of priorities. Then, seek their advice on the solution you propose. So now I have an assignment for you. You can do it now, and I'll also tell you how you can do it after today's program. Think of a marketable idea that you believe should make funders want to contribute to it. Whether you are in a business, in a governmental organization, in a nonprofit, it doesn't matter, nor does the size of the organization with which you may be associated. Think of an idea that needs to be, as it were, sold, marketed, identified as a strong and worthy proposal, either to investors or to funders like foundations or government agencies. Then rate it from 1 to 20 points on each of the 5 criteria I gave you before. Remember, the first criterion is that it relates to a major negative trend that gives it the kind of urgency we saw in the Southeast Asia tsunami. The second criterion is that the proposal should request money for a clear, unique solution to reverse the negative trend. The third characteristic is that the proposal seems achievable and makes financial sense. If you're dealing in a for-profit situation, your funders will, in fact, look for a return on their dollar. If you're dealing in a nonprofit or governmental situation, the people who fund you will want to know that there is a return to society in general, a benefit that accrues to the benefit of whole populations of people, not necessarily to a small group or even a large group of personal investors. The fourth characteristic of a strong, marketable funding proposal is that it has to inspire people, no matter what the setting, for-profit or not-for-profit. It offers more than just a solution to a problem. It makes everyone feel good about doing something good. It proposes to achieve a broad objective that improves the lives of people. And the fifth characteristic is that it can produce measurable results. Now, you can share your idea with me now during our discussion, even if it isn't fully formed in your mind. Also, anytime after today's program, email your marketable idea to me at trendsman@aol.com. Write ITC in the memo. Be sure to include the score you gave it. I'll judge and score it too, and I'll get back to you. We can compare notes. You can also go to my website at www.fundraisingguru.blogspot.com for ongoing fundraising information. But first, let me remind you of something. Just days into 2005, Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs of Columbia University presented a United Nations-sponsored report that spells out the investments needed to meet the goals of the UN Millennium Project, which was adopted by world leaders at a summit in the year 2000. If countries simply fulfill their pledges of support, pledges they've already made, he contends that extreme poverty and hunger could be eliminated in the world by the year 2015. The report also lists simple and cost-effective ways to save and improve millions of lives. Some of the steps listed include providing school lunches for children, mosquito nets in areas in which malaria is a problem, and providing generators for hospitals and schools. Don't those strategies for improving quality of life remind you of what we have discussed today about how to identify and develop a marketable proposal? And don't they also show you that both the for-profit and the non-profit world can be involved in the solving of societal issues? In language that echoes what I said in today's program, Professor Sachs says that it is time to deal with what he calls the silent tsunami of preventable diseases that kills millions every year. As more and more governments, foundations, and corporations fund projects to improve quality of life, the proposals that will be successful are those that meet the criteria I outlined at the beginning of our discussion. So, you now know how to develop compelling proposals. You know how to obtain the resources you need. You will make a difference in the lives of people. The success of your next project, I am confident, is almost guaranteed.